Welcome to Around the Coin. Today's guest is Kirill Gertman, the co-founder of Conduit. Kirill is an immigrant to the U.S. He grew up, or at least was born in USSR, Soviet Russia, and we talked about his personal journey and how that shaped the way that he views the world and at least the financial world. Kirill has a background in blockchain and fintech more broadly, and he had been solving the same problem over and over again, which is to help companies that he was working for integrate with the existing rails, financial rails that were out there. And then a few years ago, he spun off this business, Conduit, raised $17 million to build the infrastructure tools so that other companies can plug into an API and effectively launch faster on top of the crypto rails. So we dove into the details of how the API, how the crypto landscape is currently structured, what the problems are and opportunities are, and talked a lot about his personal life. I really enjoy the conversation, and I hope you do. Here is Kirill Gertman. All right, Kirill, we're live recording. Thanks for hopping on today. I'm excited to chat with you. Where to start? So I was thinking about this, and I want to start with your background a little bit. I know you had moved around a bit, coming from Ukraine, which is now in the hot seat in the World Forum. In your journey, moving from previous USSR, Canada, all around Israel, I know for a time. How was that experience generally? Maybe specifically, did it shape your view about maybe simplistically optimistic or pessimistic about the general direction of today's world, having gone through everything you've been through?
Yeah. So that's you know what, Mike? That's an interesting question. People don't usually kind of ask me that right off the bat, which I actually appreciate. It's an interesting question right away. So, I guess one thing that I should say is that, it's my experience. And so it shaped me the way I am, but I can't see it externally. I can't say if it was good for me or bad for me. I just know what I've been through, and, that's what it is for me, right? So for me, this was normal. For other people, it may not be. But in any case, I think generally my opinion about the world, I would say realistic. I try to be realistic with maybe a somewhat slight hint of optimism, actually. And people take this actually as pessimism, right? If I'm trying to be realistic, they think, maybe you're too grounded or too practical or whatnot. But no, I try to be real, and then I try to be a little bit optimistic about these things. Like I'll give you an example, actually, since you asked about my background, right? So, yes, I was born in the USSR, and I was there when it basically fell apart, right? And, at the time, there was basically a complete breakdown of, civil order, like cops wouldn't get salaries. And then imagine what happens if policemen don't get paid for 6 months, right? Or firemen or whatever, right? That's and things were quite bad, but they didn't necessarily descend into complete war and chaos in the way that maybe happened in the past, right? Now, having said that, obviously today there is war in that same place where I was born, right? So I was born in Kharkov, Ukraine. So, and I hope it does end soon, although the realistic side of me thinks it probably won't. But I guess what I'm trying to say is there was potential for, an even larger and even worse conflict and even worse state of chaos at that moment, right? Back in 89, 90, 91. And it was definitely a hard time, but, didn't devolve into total destruction of society, essentially. The way that, things have happened in the past. And we are seeing a conflict there now, and it is terrible. But I think it could have been even worse, and we avoided that. So that was probably a good thing.
Yeah, I used to have the mindset more that the internet would allow people to carry the lessons of history more effectively throughout. And I think that is true to some extent. Speaking personally, anecdotally, I watch YouTube about wars of the past, about psychology from psychology professors that I would never have had access to. And so trying to create this mental model of what has happened in the past, where are we currently today with respect to our social climate and tensions, and what games are being played today. So I think the nuance and complexities, and certainly the number of people participating in the conversation is increased. But I sometimes I think there tends to be this pattern of intervention for good ends up being bad. And what I mean by that is if you look at just about the vast majority, I'll say, of interventions governmentally, they tend to have a straightforward approach. Like, we're going to create a student loan program, and the government's going to give out 0% interest loans to people so they can go to college. Fantastic. Sounds great. But the reality is that people accumulated massive amounts of debt because that was the standard, because you had to in order to compete with other people who had access to free money. And now we're debating what we do with all the student loan debts that's dragging people down. And those are the kinds of things that I'm seeing as I get older, all over the place. And I think there's this quote that I took, and I'll let you respond to, but I think it's from Abraham Lincoln. I could be wrong on that, but it's like, it's really easy to change the world, but it's really hard to change the world for the better. And effectively, the vast majority of changes aren't for the better. And I think about that as it relates to crypto, certainly playing a major role in the potential for how human beings can cooperate. And I think we're at a point now where I like to ask people if they, especially when you've seen and lived through multiple governmental structures and multiple like political ideologies, if there are ways that you view crypto as potentially being a useful a useful structure through which we can more effectively govern ourselves. And I'll throw that back at you, respond whatever comes through for you.
Yeah, that's a big one to unpack there. You know what I mean? That's a whole conversation just around that question. But honestly, so I think the short answer is yes, but maybe not exactly in the way that people think. So what I mean by that is, you know, when people think about crypto improving society, especially people who are already in crypto, they usually tend to think about DAOs, right? And like decentralized decision making and these sort of things. And actually, I'm pretty skeptical on this type of thing, right? I actually don't necessarily believe that, you know, if you invite as many people as possible and you give them some sort of vote, that they're going to arrive to the best decision at the moment, right? I think it may actually slow things down, and right, you can't move as quickly if you're running it down, if you need to reach some sort of consensus. So I'm not sure if that's going to play out for the better, but I do believe that crypto essentially, what I think we need is not necessarily much better government structure, not because we have a good one, but actually because I don't think there's a much better one. You know what I mean? Like, what I do think we need is actually alternatives, or maybe in some sense protections against, as you said, government stupidity, essentially, right? And so a couple examples that actually immediately come to mind that are possible with crypto, right? If you're a refugee, if you have to escape your country, right? And, you know, again, right now, right, in Ukraine, there's a war, or in Africa or whatever else you are, there are all kinds of conflicts going on. You, generally speaking, will not be able to like go to your bank, in most cases, empty your bank account and just take it across the border somewhere else. It's just not going to work. Bitcoin just works fine, right? Perfectly fine. And so you don't even need to have anything. You theoretically, most people never do, but theoretically you could memorize, you know, your seed phrase, the 12 words, and just with those 12 words in your head, you can cross the border and get to the next, you know, Bitcoin ATM, whatever, right? And then so have something that you can carry with you. And it's a sort of a protection, right? It's a sort of a protection. Obviously, the other thing that people are talking about a lot is, you know, hedge against inflation. And as we've seen lately, that didn't quite play out in the way that we would have all liked, I'm sure, right? So Bitcoin price went down just as everything else did. So it's not actually uncorrelated. But I'm actually on that one, I'm actually pretty optimistic, because I think over time it will be. And I also think, you know, sure, it went down from the all-time high, right, and down to 20K or whatever the price is, but everything did. And if you think that Bitcoin has no value, it should have gone to zero, right? And it actually just kind of went basically in the same direction that everything else. And so that to me is the first step, right? You can't get all the way there immediately to being decoupled and decorrelated, but at least I think the fact that it's still there, it's not going to zero. It actually does have a really positive indication that people actually do think there's value there, right? There's real value there, and maybe the value was inflated just like everything else was, right? But it didn't collapse. It still works fine, right? And so to me, that's actually a very positive thing. And I think you need more of these things, right? Things that are decentralized, but not necessarily in the decision making, but just in terms of giving individuals, giving people and companies tools that they can use, not even escape control, right? But just have more options, essentially, right? Do I want to have a cross-border payment through Western Union, which is super expensive and really slow? Do I want to send, like stablecoin, which is quick and cheap? So that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't take many experiences for individuals to go from a mindset of trusting in centralized organizations to having a almost repulsive disdain for centralization, if there's an alternative that's decentralized and trustworthy. So I think, to your point, I agree with you. I think that while Bitcoin and the USD and the stock exchange are relatively correlated today, it's only because, if I were to guess, a majority of the money in Bitcoin today is still owned by people who have relatively liquid options into the equities markets and into other options. Whereas, if for instance, you had a centralized exchange shut down and you had your money in Bitcoin, then the price would go the other way, because your assets would move into into Bitcoin, into the decentralized option, given that you're in a time of low trust. And I think that if anything, I think about it as trust in institutions relative to price would be inversely related. So, as the world kind of gets more chaotic, as trust in institutions change, as political structures change, it would seem to me that crypto and Bitcoin in particular just are going to become more important to the social structure and wealth preservation.
I mean, we see people. We see people doing this today all the time, right? There's a lot of, for example, in Asia, right? And when people want to move funds, move money around, for example, in certain cases, folks want to get funds out of China. They use Tether, right? In most cases. We see this again in Ukraine and in Russia, where there's a huge amount of crypto that's being used, right? Again, not for anything fancy, right? Not for anything esoteric. It's not even about inflation. It's just can I get my assets out of here and somewhere else because I don't trust that the bank will keep them safe for me, or that I can't even get them out of the bank at all, right? So that's there. And I think, maybe just a kind of more broad general comment that come to mind when you mentioned government decisions is that, right now, a lot of people are saying that the world is going crazy and whatnot. And yes, in certain cases it is. But I actually think the world today, right now, is more sane than it was, let's say, 2 years ago. Again, maybe war in Ukraine aside and, some of these conflicts aside. But for us here in the U.S., in most of the West, the markets are doing what they should have been doing 2 years ago, honestly, right? And we, again, just like you said, same idea of maybe intended, maybe unintended consequences. Just like with student loans, we printed a bunch of money to stave it off, right? To essentially postpone the inevitable. And now it's here, and it's actually worse because we tried to delay it by, printing fiat and causing actually a worse situation than would have happened if we just let it play out. And so that's not great. Those decisions are not great. And is crypto going to help you against that? To some extent, right? To some extent, I think it will. I think more and more over time, just like you said, people will move into assets that you can't block, right? You can't print more Bitcoin as a central bank or whatever it is. And I think there's going to be attractiveness to that, even aside from the price itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really product market fit, price aside, is what is attractive to people on a base, simple layer. To your point, it doesn't need to be the deeper you get into crypto, the more you see the potential splintering of optionality or product features you can build. But I think that is just a stereotypical trap of any founder or product team where or engineering team, you get into it and you build for the sake of building science projects. And, it's kind of like, oh, we're going to build it and then people are going to come, and then you just keep building and building and building, spending more and more money. And then people just kind of don't quite come as quickly as you thought they would. And so there's like a recessionary period, which that's my narrative. That's my overarching narrative of why we're in the period that we're in, which makes sense. It's hard.
I mean, yeah. I think so, and I think right now what we will see a lot of, and this is what I believe we're doing, but what we're going to see is that a lot of people who came into this space, especially the crypto space, just by and wanted to get rich quick, essentially, right? They got a bit burned. Not all of them, actually. Some of them came out great, right? But there's a number that got too greedy, got burned, and there's in a sense right now after after Luna, after UST and Celsius and so forth, and 3 hours capital and all these things, and we're not done yet, by the way. I firmly believe there's going to be 4 hours or whatever it is, right? These numbers going to keep going, but we kind of have a bit of a cleansing.
What was it? 4 hours? You said, or the numbers of?
No, I was trying to make a joke, right? So like we had 3 hours capital, and there's got to be a sequel to that, right? There's got to be like a 4 hours capital or whatever, 5, right? There's got to be more of these same ones, just more of those, because we're not done with this yet for sure.
Do you?
But again, I actually think in the long run it's a good thing.
When you say we're not done with it, do you mean like large scale projects failing, or specifically CeFi crypto projects failing?
I think, more specifically CeFi projects, especially the ones that are black boxes. Because I think, if you think about this, one of the things that, at least again, in my personal opinion, that's in common with a bunch of them, right? Celsius, 3 Arrows, and even Luna, even Anchor, right? Although there was a blockchain, but still users, people who put money in there did not understand what was actually happening with that money, right? Where it was going, how they were getting, like where was the 20% interest coming from? If you ask, 99% of users of Luna, I bet you they would have no idea where it actually came from. They were just liking it while it was there, and that's it, right? And similarly, Celsius and 3 Hours Capital and other ones. And if you operate like that, you obviously there are risks that your customers are exposed to. There are risks that you're exposed to, and I think eventually, especially within crypto, you will fail. Right? You're going to fail. And I think there are more companies like that operate similarly without transparency, without their customers understanding what's going on, and. I think as we haven't seen, again, my personal opinion, don't take my word as investment advice or anything like that, but I don't think we've seen Bitcoin bottom out yet. I think it will go down, and as it does, we'll have more margin calls and more of these kind of more centralized black box type entities will fail. But actually, I think the real important point here is the fact that, Bitcoin itself, price aside, functions just fine, right? Functions perfectly. It survived, pretty severe volatility. It survived the loss of mining capacity in China a few years ago, right? It survived events that would definitely kill basically any centralized system, right? But moreover, right, the DeFi protocols that are really decentralized, right? Compound, Aave, Uniswap, you can name a bunch of them. Again, going through really severe kind of volatility right now. Sure, the rates may be dropping, but the functionality is still there, right? They work as intended, essentially. And to me, that's actually proof point that these things will survive and outlast this, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. What are the... So as a little bit of context, I interviewed Andy from Eco, where I know you spent a few years working prior to starting Conduit. When you started Conduit, was there a particular emotional connection to this project, or technical insight, or business logistical insight that you had? Like, what was kind of the spark for you to get into this, and also just frame out what Conduit is trying to do in the world?
Sure. Yeah, maybe I'll actually start with that, so then the rest of my answer makes sense, right? And so I think what Conduit is doing, right, given the name, you actually mentioned it, I think, inadvertently before, right? Because that is exactly what we're trying to do. We're building this connection between DeFi and the real world, right? So like I was saying, I'm a practical guy, I'm a realist at the end of the day. And I actually believe for crypto to scale, for DeFi in particular to scale, it needs to be more accessible, right? It needs to be useful to just people, any normal person on the street, without having to get into what's Ethereum, how does a smart contract work, any of this stuff, right? You shouldn't need to do that. And I think that's what's going to unlock scale. It's not a nice UX, right? It's not like a better button, right? Better menu. No, it's actually the fact that you can get into it and you can start using and gain some value without having to go through this really steep learning curve. What's crypto? What's Ethereum? What's this, right? Like that's crazy. So that's what we're doing in Conduit, right? We're essentially creating this platform where we can go, seamlessly from fiat, and we support a bunch of fiat currencies. So US dollar, pesos, Mexican peso, Colombian peso, Argentinian reais in Brazil, a number of currencies in Africa, like Nigerian naira, Kenyan shilling, and so forth. We can go from there into stable coins, right? So USDC is our preferred stable coin, but we can support whatever technically. We take care of custody, we take care of key management, and then we are able to deploy this into a bunch of protocols, right? So like permissionless, permissioned, even centralized, right? And we can tailor it to our customers' risk appetite and desire for exposure with transparency, right? By saying this is exactly what's happening with your money and this is what you're getting in return, right? And so we're creating this platform essentially that sits on top of crypto and abstracts away all the complexity. We'll deal with all the pain of gas fees and, how do I manage my seed phrase and, all this kind of stuff. And just let people get to the value, right? So going back to the rest of the question, I think, one thing that I loved about Eco and I still love about Eco is the fact that that's what Eco is doing, right? And in a specific use case, right? Consumer oriented. But if you're using the Eco app, you can just download it from the App Store, just like any neobank or, just like Cash App or whatever. You download it from the App Store. You don't need to know anything special. It works exactly like you believe it will, right? You don't need to learn it. You just get more value, right? You get 5% interest, right? And by inviting friends, whatever. Right, there's just like instant, immediate, obvious, practical value that you get without having to figure out what's, what's a stable coin, what's USDC versus USDT, all that kind of stuff, right? So to me, that's really important. But having spent a bunch of time there, myself and now my co-founder Mike, so Michael Gregson, our CTO, was also working with me at Ecom. So we both kind of realized that this is really hard. Building this is really hard, and making it seamless is really difficult. And can we help other companies with other use cases, right? Not copying anything that Eco is doing, but B2B use cases in other geographies, and as I was mentioning, Latin America, in Africa, and all these sort of places. Can we help them get easier access to crypto? Because even for us, and me and Mike, we've been in the space for a while, right? I've been in crypto for like 5 years now or more. Even for us, it was difficult to build. Now imagine a company that's trying to do this, from scratch. So we thought, can we build something that would just get them up to speed better and would allow them to create products for their customers, right? So Conduit, we're not B2C, right? So we're not like Eco in that sense. We don't go directly to consumers. We go to like Fintechs, Neobanks, all kinds of companies. And then they build products for the end users, right? So that's what we decided to create, and that's what we're working on today.
Yeah, great answer. What were the things that you weighed on either side when you were debating staying at Eco and continuing to build in-house versus spinning out this new company?
You know what? I should have probably weighed more things. I should have probably spent, but I don't know. I think to me it was pretty obvious, actually. It was kind of intuitive, right? It was essentially, again, like I said, basically a pain, a need that we were experiencing, right, for a while ourselves. And And, it's not just eco, right? As I mentioned, I've been in crypto for a while, right? Before eco, I was a VP of product at Bread Wallet, which is a decentralized, mobile wallet, got eventually acquired by Coinbase. And we had the same problems over there too, right? And so kind of going through this a whole bunch of times, and building these, consumer facing products, right? And then realizing, well, we're actually spending more time on the back end than we're trying to build like features for the actual user. Time and time again, right? Not just Eco, but back in Bread Wallet and before that as well, right? So eventually it just clicked, which to me, when I kind of thought about this, I was like, wow, am I slow? Like it took me a while to realize that I keep doing this and it keeps being hard. And, why can't somebody make it easy, right? So that, by that point, it was, I guess, obvious enough there wasn't that much of a decision process. I was just like, yeah.
Yeah. And do you think of it by analogy, maybe to the neobank world? You have traditional banks that operate heavy logistical, legal, regulatory compliance behind the scenes that no one sees. You just log into your USAA, Chase, Wells Fargo account. And then there is this wave. So if I'm looking at the distribution or allocation of capital and resources, attention from a bank, not a traditional bank, not a lot of it goes to customer UI. Like the vast majority, I'm sure, goes to like capital management, their lending business, regulatory compliance, all this stuff. Neobanks kind of flip the game a bit where they place a big emphasis on user experience, marketing, distribution, the kinds of things a typical SaaS or product-led startup would think about to their success, because that has been kind of a under invested in part of the user experience. And then they back office that to another bank. So a bank will manage the actual accounts. They'll do all of that stuff. And the banks are kind of like the engine room. And I think there's companies out there that basically make it easy to do this as a neobank. Is that an apt analogy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where you
very much so. Very much so. And in fact, look, I've been in fintech longer than I've been in crypto, right? So like I've been in fintech since 2010. So this and back then, right, we were trying to build a personal finance app. There was nothing to build on, right? There was like one vendor, one platform called Yodlee, and they're still around, but there wasn't Plaid, there wasn't Marquette, right? There wasn't this stack, and there wasn't this whole infrastructure sort of layer that exists today. Yeah, and it was hard, right? So like, and it was just as hard back then to do that as it is today to do something in crypto, to build something in crypto, right? And that changed over time, and I saw that change, right? Being in the industry and actually being on the banking side, because I spent some time in fintech, then banking, then crypto, and I kind of saw like the entire, production of that sausage from all sides. And I was like, well, in fintech, after a while, you got stuff like Plaid, you got stuff like Marqeta, right? You have a bunch of these sort of software infrastructure plays that now make it super easy for you to build a neobank. And I went over to crypto, and again, it took me a while to realize that. I realized, well, that doesn't really exist in crypto. You don't have this entire industry of companies that are just trying to make the infrastructure possible. So then you, like as a neobank or a crypto exchange or a crypto wallet or whatever it is, right? So then you can actually go and build UX as opposed to like focusing on how does this thing even work at all, right? So that's what we're doing right now for crypto. Hopefully, it will bring the same thing to crypto as it did for fintech.
What are some of the key features that developers are looking for on the crypto side? Like, is it exchange, the ability to exchange, maintain a wallet? Like, if you think of them as like from top priority down, what are the types of things on the API that you prioritize?
Yeah. I'll tell you, there's a lot of basic stuff that again, as we were building this, we didn't even have, right? So you would assume outside of crypto and just normal sort of engineer world, SaaS or whatever it is, if you want to try out an API, you have a sandbox, and you don't need to talk to a salesperson. You don't need to actually sign up, right? Or go through some sort of arduous process. Like, you think about Stripe or something like that, right? There's an API, documentation's online. You want to try it out? Go ahead, right? Play in the sandbox, try to integrate it. And again, that kind of stuff that seems very basic and obvious to me then for the most part doesn't even exist in crypto, right? We talked to a bunch of vendors like, can we get access to your sandbox? No, we can't. Why not? Well, you have to like KYB and you have to pay for even pay for just accessing the sandbox. Not even like we're doing anything. Like I was like, this sucks, right? It makes no sense. So like that's the very base layer is just like the quality of the offer, right? So that's kind of number one. And then building up on that, obviously, you have things like as kind of listed. So can I go from fiat to crypto? Can I connect my fiat accounts, my users' fiat accounts, right? If I do that, how do I deal with KYC, right? How do I deal with KYB? So know your customer, right? These are like compliance rules and then monitoring and all this kind of stuff. How do I keep track of their transactions? How do I make sure that I know their balances? I know like which balance belongs to which customer and so forth, right? There's a lot of that kind of stuff that you need to be able to do, and that's what we're building. And I think eventually at the top of this pyramid, as you pretty well put it, right? So like at the top of this is like, okay, what's the value am I getting? So all of this works. Can I give my users access to yield, or can I give my business users access to easier borrowing, for example, if they want to like actually borrow, like whatever it is, like what's the value there, right? And that's I think the value in DeFi is there. It's just you need to build up the rest of the pyramid to be able to actually get to access it, because otherwise it's too hard, it's too complicated. You can't really work with it, right? As an engineer.
Yeah.
Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, totally. Do you feel it's a timing thing where just there's not enough projects, or there hasn't been enough time for companies to build out sandboxes and build out some of the features that you were looking for previously when you were at Eco, and that it's kind of it's not that these companies want to charge you to use a sandbox or want to make it difficult, but they're just early. Maybe they're like, just hustling hard just to get the basic API set up. They're racing against the clock, and it's just a new industry in crypto. Is that kind of how you view it, or more so that companies are missing the target? Like they're just building, no one's actually seeing what they should be building.
I think it's a combination of a few things, right? And I think part of it is what you mentioned. A part of it, again, we were in the bull market for the last couple of years in crypto, right? And it was just it was easy to make money in some sense, and so you kind of didn't have to work hard for it, right? You didn't have to try very hard. People came to you anyway, right? And if you have just a couple of players in an industry, kind of like we have in crypto, as a customer, as an engineer, you don't really have a ton of choice anyway, right? So they'll come to you. You don't need to spend a ton of time building out building out the basics, because, what else they're going to do? And then again, the money was easy, it was flowing. And now I think it's changing where, you do have to work hard to convince engineers to kind of build on your platform. You have to work a lot harder to make sure that people actually want your product. And I think it's a good thing, right? Because it forces you to be more thoughtful about it. It forces you to have better value, right? At the end of the day. So that's why I'm like, I think this is a good thing. If you focus on building a better experience rather than trying to, incentivize your users with 20% interest. Yeah. I think overall, in the long term, you probably will succeed, right? But again, I'm biased here.
Did you take any particular, maybe stereotypical crypto approach to this or are you thinking about creating a token, DAO, decentralizing products, or more of the, hey, let's just C Corp, cap table, raise money standard, like try to build products and services for crypto?
Yeah, no, we did a standard. So again, C Corp, equity, raised on equity, have a cap table, have investors, have a board, right? And there's a couple of reasons for that, because we did it a little while ago, right? We actually did it at the end of last year, where we could have done a token, we could have done anything. But I actually think that structure, as much as many faults as it has, and as much as people kind of like to abuse it or whatever, but there's it's there for a reason, and it's not perfect and has a lot of downsides, but it does create the system. I have checks and balances, right? Let's say I have investors, I have a board, right? And then I'm obviously the CEO of my own company, right? So there's a structure to it that's existed for a while now, right? And it's kind of proven over time to generally work pretty well, right? Again, not perfect, doesn't work every time, lots of downsides, but if you have a DAO, I think sort of governance is much more difficult. We haven't figured that out yet. We haven't figured out checks and balances. I've seen kind of how DAO treasuries are managed in certain cases, and they're not. I mean, they're not, right?
Yeah.
So so we just wanted to figure, we'll do it, because I almost feel like you can't innovate everywhere all at once. You know what I mean? Like if you're trying to build something, just focus on innovating there, building something that's great, and don't try to innovate with your cap table at the same time or your governance structure at the same time, right? Just focus one thing and do it well and execute there, right? And if you're trying to do everything all at once, you're more likely not going to do a great job everywhere.
Yeah. I would even take that a step further to say, specifically to give advice that when you're building a startup, you want to be you don't want to be innovative anywhere in your company except for the one thing that you're building that is innovative. So if you have to your point, an innovative cap table, innovative financial structure, innovative way to pay employees, all these things are negative indicators to investors. And, it's like, hey, we started the company in Cyprus, and then we moved it to Canada, and then we split, and we have a umbrella company that owns it. And it's like, all that shit is just risk for an investor. So it's straightforward down the pipe for everything, except for the one thing you're doing. Makes it way easier to raise money.
Yeah, and actually, I think it makes and even more importantly, right, makes it easier to focus, right? So if you're that we're gonna do vote on features, that's what people do. Does that work? Sometimes it does. Most of the time, it probably doesn't work all that well, right? So I think we have PMs and kind of all kinds of things in place. Again, not perfect, but it does work, I think. And so to me, what we've done is in a sense, it's a signal that look, we're serious about this, right? By the way, there's another thing that I guess I can mention is that if you do tokens, right, maybe as another kind of even more deeper piece of advice, right, to somebody that's considering this now. If you do tokens, there's this sort of implicit expectation of liquidity, or at least there used to be before the market crash, that's going to come very quickly, right? So you need liquidity within 2 years or whatever. And if you don't get it, you're going to have a lot of pressure. And I think the way that this aligns incentives, between the company and the investors and the employees, it's not great, right? Like when I was raising money, I talked to my potential future investors, is look, we're going to be in this for 5 years, 10 years. We're going to have ups and downs, right? As we're having right now. And you gotta sign up for the long run, right? And they have, right, and it's not, they have their life of fund, and when they have considerations in the back end, and some of them said yes, and some of them said no, and that's fine, right? And we went with the ones that said, yeah, we're gonna sign up for the long run. And I think that's really important to have the incentives aligned in a way that if you're building something, you want to be building it for a while, right? It's very unlikely to really create something great in 2 years.
Yeah, who signs up for the short run in crypto? I feel like if that's somebody's response on investors, it's maybe you just get eliminated by this, the process of evolution on investing. But it would seem like the short run, unless you're in it for quick wins on speculative prices increases, I don't know. I mean, when people
I think there's no middle in crypto. I mean, it's either really quick, really short, or really long term, right? And there's no middle ground almost. You're not going to do this for 3 years because either you build something that's lasting or you just turn around real quick and move on. And I wanted to be in the kind of longer game.
Yeah. Is there a restrictions, or to what degree is there restrictions on international expansion? If you are integrating with the banks, I know you said you have a multitude of different currencies you're operating through, Africa, South America, North America. Is the expansion of those either currencies or countries incremental due to some restriction on partnerships, or like what does growth country by country look like?
Yeah, it's a pretty cumbersome process, I'm gonna admit, right? It's not an easy process, and there's a bunch of components that go into this. And the primary consideration that we have is actually regulation, right? So what's the regulatory environment like? Do we need to get a license? If yes, what does that license look like? How long does it take to obtain it? How maybe expensive it is in terms of fees or whatever, right? And so we kind of look at this and we decide, in certain cases, we actually decided that it's not worth it for us, right? The process too long, license too expensive, and the market's too small. In many other cases, we said, we're going to figure out exactly what we need to do to abide by the local rules and regulation. And that's really step one, right? We need to figure out what's going on within each kind of specific country in regards to crypto legislation. Is there any? Sometimes there isn't, right? How is crypto a commodity? Is crypto a currency? What is it? And what do we need to do to be within those bounds, right? So everything we do is above board, which is, again, maybe a little bit conservative, but that's what we're trying to do. And so that's step one, is for us to figure out what can we do here. And for that, we need to, what we learned the hard way, you need to find local experts, right? You can't talk to a firm that sits in New York or in DC and say, hey, can you tell me about laws in Brazil? No, you need to talk to somebody in Brazil. And so that's step one. And then step two is, how can we, just like you were saying, how can we get from local fiat currency into stablecoin, right? And so that's, generally speaking, a local partner in each country that, again, plays by the local rules, right? And can give us access, can accept fiat, right? So let's say Brazilian reais or whatever it is, and, help us convert into USDC or other stable coins, and then we kind of take it over from there in most cases. So it's a pretty, first time we did this probably took us 4 months, I think, or longer, just to figure out one country. Now we've streamlined this a bit, but it's still a pretty it's a drag, it's a pretty cumbersome process.
Is there any, do you find, maybe asking almost probably the same thought process you had, is there any company that aggregates this data or centralizes the contact points or somehow makes it easy? Because I'm sure there's just so many people that are creating products that want to expand into different countries and are faced with the problem of how do you decipher what countries to go into, what are the contact points to go into, and then all the questions around licensure.
I don't think there is one for crypto specifically. I think there is actually, I'm trying to remember the name. There is one for SaaS, I think out of the UK, and I think it's called Paddle, I believe. Sorry if I butchered the name. And there may be a couple of these, for how to not just localize your SaaS application, but actually make sure it works with local payment methods, Stripe in the US or whatever, some up in Europe, whatever it is, all this kind of stuff. Yes, for more traditional plays, yeah. For crypto, not really, right? Not really. And I think the biggest difficulty there is that things keep changing in crypto, right? So when we went live in Brazil, I think December of last year, January this year, there was a situation like that. And now there's legislation in the parliament there to, change the crypto regulation. And so within, 6 months or 12 months, it's actually going to be pretty different, right? And it's everywhere. Same thing in the US, by the way, right? Same thing in every country. So it's really hard to keep track of. I don't think you can really automate that, right? It's still, for us at least. If somebody's out there, just contact me. I'll pay you whatever you want. But for now, it's all manual.
Well, it would seem like whatever you're doing there, when you're researching the government pages, talking to lawyers, you're probably doing duplicate work from what other companies are doing. So it's a bunch of crypto companies are trying to figure out what the landscape is like in Argentina and Brazil, all over Europe, and it just, it's interesting because it seems like, even though it's especially because crypto is changing fast, something should exist that allows companies like yours to have a more transparent access to the changing nature. And it's not automated. It's maybe a combination of software, but it's really people who are interpreting the rules and kind of creating here's what's going on. Here's what you should be aware of. And maybe this is kind of just ideating on the product, or a potential here is there can be an alliance or a collective effort of crypto companies to influence law in different countries for the better. Because if it's only the banks in Brazil that are getting together and lobbying governments, and there's no kind of like organized crypto advocacy going on, then we kind of can see where that might go. So yeah, it would seem helpful. There's certainly lack of a desire to
it'd be nice, right? That's like an industry association type thing, right? Or whatever you call it. It's essentially, a group of companies. And that exists, by the way, in plenty of industries, right? So from agriculture, right? You have like the association of like peanut growers in the US. Like that's a real thing. Or, or in banking or in finance, right? And a bunch of different industries. You have that. I think crypto is so new, it kind of didn't materialize yet, right? I don't think anybody's really tried to put it together. I think if it does exist, it'd be great, because one of the big things I always say about regulation, it's not a bad thing in itself. The bad thing is if you do it stupid, right? If the regulation is smart, it's fine, right? If it makes sense and if it actually helps people and helps companies, that's not a bad thing, right? I'm not one of those people who's like nothing, you can't read. No. Like I'm not against regulation. I just don't think that right now in a lot of these places, and we kind of have a pretty broad view, right? Because we look in a bunch of countries. A lot of the time, people think, crypto is like one thing. It's like a monolithic sort of a thing. And you can say, I'm going to regulate all of crypto and I'm going to make it all, whatever, right? The security or whatever it is. And like, no, that's not actually how it works, right? Crypto is a category of things. And there are many different things within that category. And they're very different, right? The stable coin, not the same as Bitcoin, not the same as a smart contract, not the same as an NFT, right? And these things are very different. They work in different ways. And if you want to like put some rules around it, sure, but take into account that like, an NFT is not the same as a Bitcoin. They don't work the same way. People don't use them for the same thing, right? So kind of as long as you're mindful, and I think that's going back to the point, which is, if there was actually some sort of like association or whatever you call it, or a lobby or whatever, that can actually explain these things, right? And say, okay, here's how it works. That would be super helpful, but it doesn't. I think the closest thing to that I can remember is Armstrong, going on Twitter and talking about the SEC.
Yeah,
that was it. Like that was the closest thing there.
Yeah, which is, it would probably a signal that the industry needs something more substantial, because while one person's voice is credible, if you're running Coinbase, it's also not sustainable. You can't expect either Brian individually or even just leaders of companies, because you're taking a serious risk by putting yourself out there alone, because everyone else in crypto could just back away if the SEC came hard at Coinbase. It's like, unless there's any incentive to stick together and have like a collective effort or opinion on things, then people get attacked. Interesting.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the more recent regulations on, this is something I've personally gone back and forth with sanctions. So banning different countries, the U.S. bans countries like Iran that we have issues with, certainly Russia because of the war, not just the U.S., this is many Western countries. Do you align with the way that the governments in Western countries have taken a strong stance on sanctions? The caveat being, of course, it seems to be at least partially effective, but also very destructive to the people. You wouldn't just launch a bomb in the middle of a city if you're going to go after a country. You try to hit military bases strategically. And this, to me, seems more or less like destructive to the people of the countries, as opposed to the military in particular.
Yeah, I think that's it's pretty similar to the view I have, and I should say that obviously Russia, case in point, right? So again, I was born in Kharkiv. This is on the Ukrainian side. This is one of the cities that's being sort of bombed and attacked right now by Russia, and Russia is doing terrible things. And there should be consequences to that on the state level, maybe on the politician level, right? So like Putin personally, for example, sure. Do sanctions work? To some extent, they do. To some extent, they end up hurting the people more, right? I think in the beginning we were talking about this, right? Why do people are flocking to crypto, especially, again, Ukraine and Russia, both actually, right? Both individuals, right? Because they partially because of sanctions on the Russian side, partially because they don't trust the government and so forth. So I think, again, kind of similarly, sanctions can be applied sort of in a blanket way that doesn't actually, are they working on Putin right now? No. Just like bluntly, no, right? So clearly it's not working. The war is still continuing, right? His ability to bomb Ukrainian cities has not diminished in any meaningful way because of any sanctions. But the quality of life of people actually does go down, right? And it does have an impact. And I guess the idea is, right, if a lot of people individually suffer, maybe they will sort of like rise up and replace their own government, whatever. Yeah. Maybe that will happen, but maybe, that there's not a lot of precedent to that historically, honestly, right? So, I don't think it's the most
certainly not a lot of precedent for that being a positive, sustainable change.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, that's the other side of it. And so, yeah, I'm not sure. But by the way, obviously, the next question that kind of begs itself is okay, what's a better way? Yeah, And I'm not sure what is a better way, right? Just go war directly with Russia. That's probably not a good idea, right? They have nukes. So, but I think what we're doing right now does not seem to be super effective in, containing, Russian aggression, right?
How about outside of Russia's situation, maybe drawing a line around crypto, international government regulations, or if anything else comes to mind? We were chatting pre-show about your views on the world, or if there's opinions that you wanted to throw out there. Just an open-ended question. Are there areas that you feel that you've investigated recently or feel like you have a unique insight to or interest in?
I don't know about unique insight. It's hard to say, but I guess I can just reiterate. Overall, I'm still, even with everything that's going on today, I'm still pretty positive, I think, about the future, because kind of like the stock market in some sense, right? If you look at it, daily or monthly, there's a lot of volatility. Things are going up and down. But you look at it over decades or maybe hundreds of years, and if you look at the world the same way, I think we live a better life than people used to live 200 years ago, 300 or 1,000 years ago, whatever, right? We probably live a better life than anyone ever in history so far, right? And you can point to, terrible things that are happening, whether Ukraine now, World War II, or, there are spikes, right? But just overall, most of humanity, I think, is better off today. And I think that's the weird thing, because I feel like you're kind of referring to that. I feel like we make a lot of mistakes all the time, as individuals, and probably even more so as governments, right? We tend to screw up a lot, but somehow on the balance of it, eventually, not quickly, and not after we tried everything else, but eventually, somehow progress still happens, right? And we're still better off overall today. And I think that's kind of it's a motivation to me, because otherwise, if you believe everything is doom and gloom, what are you going to do with yourself, right? So I still think there's a path to a better future, and I think it will happen almost despite of us. You know what I mean? Somehow we humans kind of, we still manage, right? We're still here. We're doing, again, not great, but better than we used to. So somehow we manage, and I think that's not a unique insight probably, but
I believe in that. I agree with you. I think I think when we start to really, because we're kind of dealing with problems of utopia. You have a house, we have food, we have access to just about everything you need to live. And now it's you're solving higher level problems. If you think about the problem that you're solving in the world, if you actually think you used to go out and you used to spend your time, and this is all of our ancestors, used to go out and food. It's I'm a farmer, I'm growing livestock. Maybe I'm working in the police or military to protect people, but there's only a handful of things. Now you're building a layer of abstraction in this new crypto land to allow companies to build on top of you. The levels of abstraction that you would have to imagine explaining what you're building to your great grandfather, and it's how many layers of stories you'd have to tell to even get to the point of being able to explain what you're doing. Like, okay, then there's these things called computers. What the hell is a computer?
Right.
Oh, it's the internet and the crypto. Yeah. And I mean, I think about that, and I think about the patterns there that are repeating and where things go in the most broad sense. And I feel like somehow connecting to, through a better organization of the human species, like connecting to whether it's other conscious life forms on other planets. But I feel like if there's anything I'm getting to in this ramble is that people today seem to be lacking a North Star as a society. Like the number of people who are religiously identified 50 years ago, I think was like 8 out of 10. Today, it's like 7 to 8 out of 10 are not religiously affiliated. It's the largest group of people under 30. And I kind of think that it's because of this. It's because we don't have any obvious immediate problems that are calling us to become united under this belief system or this purpose. It's like we're all just fucking gaming, building NFTs, doing different shit, and it's not necessarily a problem, but it does seem to. Right. I don't know.
I agree with you. No, I think that's right. It's essentially because when you're used to like our entire sort of evolutionary process, millions of years, right? Focused on essentially survival and ensuring that you don't go hungry, right? And now you don't have these huge, again, some parts of the world you still do, but for most people, in most places, right, you don't. And so when you, especially here in the US and just in Europe and West in general, and so then you're like, what am I gonna do with myself, right? So like the NFTs or whatever, they're great, but it's not a North Star. So I feel like people start inventing problems, right? I'm sure you've seen lately, right? You come up with, I'm gonna try to fix this or that, and sure, right? There's something to fix, but is it like a higher purpose? No, but there isn't one. So just come up with like issues to attach yourself to that, maybe of inflated importance.
Yeah.
I don't. Again, this is the same thing as the last one. I don't have a better answer here, honestly, but I do see it.
What do you think are the biggest problems? What do you think are the biggest problems facing the human species today? I'm with Musk in that sense, right? I think we need to go to space. I think that is if there's anything that can sort of unite, not everyone, all right? Because again, not even everyone believes we should be even trying, but just in terms of like the biggest problem, I think we have the capability, right? We have, but we don't have as much desire to, right? And I think what SpaceX is doing is going to be eventually a huge benefit to humanity overall in the long run, and then there needs to be way more of that. And that's something that I'm actually a big believer in, right? Like, go to space, and we shouldn't obviously pollute Earth to death or whatever. That's not the point, right? But the point is for us to expand, right? For us to keep surviving, we need to go elsewhere. We need to be able to go elsewhere. And then there's so many benefits that come as essentially almost like side effects, right? Of space travel, new technologies that you have to develop that then become, sort of find their way into consumers or other applications, right? There's so much new ground that it's just, I honestly believe it's beneficial to everyone. So that's probably the biggest problem. And, crypto is somewhere there, maybe in the top, 3. But, number one is probably not crypto. To be honest with you. Yeah, I almost view crypto is like the medicine for the problems in some way. Maybe there's a better way to distribute resources from local farmers, and maybe crypto provides a better way for agricultural firms to innovate the way that they harvest or distribute food, and maybe that impacts biodiversity because the rate at which we're destroying the ocean and the rainforests seem to be the biggest impact to climate change and present existential risk. So I view crypto as like somebody could look at the tool set that maybe you're building or other people are building in crypto and saying, okay, we're going to combine these blocks together, and then we're going to remix the way that like the food supply chain works in some way. And that's kind of how I view it. Like, we invented crypto, human beings came up with it. So it's not a problem in and of itself. It's tools to solve problems and invent new problems. I'm sure there'll be new problems along the way.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there are today, but I do agree with you. It's essentially because we came up with a financial system that's not great, right? It doesn't work for everyone. It's not sort of equitable. It's not distributed in a fair way. People don't have access to it, and that's kind of fundamental, I think, to the way it's been built, right? So I don't think you can, fix it. Mm-hmm. I think crypto is a good answer to that, and essentially an opportunity to do it better in a more open way, in a more transparent way, in a way that builds equality, in a way that allows people, a business from Africa can actually access resources, that otherwise they wouldn't be able to. So like all these things are really important, and crypto does allow that. And I think it's kind of a fix to an ailment that we've also created ourselves and over time developed into something that I think is, generally speaking, unhealthy. And I'm not sure if crypto will completely replace it, but I think it will definitely help, right? I think it can open new possibilities, and I think it does help. So I'm positive in crypto, right?
Yeah,
for sure.
Clearly, given what you're working on. Are there any either books that you've read or people or projects you wanted to shout out as being ones that have been particularly influential in your thinking or learning?
So there's a few. It's interesting because I think there's a bunch of sort of business books that are obviously, I think, super helpful. You can think of Andy Grove, How I Put Management, and Only the Paranoid Survive, and a bunch of stuff that's super helpful. But I actually think people talk too much about these things, right? Kind of publicly on social or on podcast or whatever, right? And I think people don't talk enough about things that, like what inspires your imagination, right? So I don't know if you can tell, but I've been a huge fan of like sci-fi since I was a kid, and I was growing up and I read, like Isaac Asimov and Dune, and all this kind of stuff, Heinlein. And I think it's super inspiring. And I actually caught myself that I realized for years I haven't read like, a science fiction book because I've been focusing on like business and then that kind of thing, technical, stuff. And so I think I encourage people to put away maybe the business self-help book for a moment there and actually go back to something that's not directly attached to your day-to-day. And I think it's actually healthy. It's inspiring. I've been rereading the works of Roger Zelazny, like an American sci-fi author, unrelated to crypto, right? Yeah. Unrelated to business, but I just like him. So I think people should do that.
I like that. I read recently a 3-Body Problem, which is a sci-fi book.
Yes.
It's really good. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think just elaborating on that slightly, I think the expansion of your creativity, if you put it in terms of a purpose or a reason for doing it, which I even somewhat resent doing, because in and of itself, it's like the purpose is the adventure. But it also seems to be more, I find more creativity in my day-to-day life after reading these books and going down these like wormholes, because it's just like, you can see things differently. It breaks up patterns in your day-to-day life. And, maybe from a business sense, if that's someone's true motivation, like there's an upside to it.
Yeah, I mean, people talk a lot about like mental health these days, which is a real thing, and it's really important. And people talk about, taking a day off or whatever and that's, again, it's important. But like, look, if what you're doing is you're like, changing your location from your home office or a real office, and you're going to the beach, and then you're scrolling through Instagram there. Like, it's not actually, you're not helping. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just about changing where where you put, where you plant your ass, right? It's also like there needs to be some sort of like mental escape almost, right? Or kind of, mental distraction, right? And I think books are great shows and whatever, right? There's many ways to do it, but I think people don't give enough importance to the fact that you need to disconnect mentally, and a book is a great way to do that. And put down your damn phone. I
totally agree. Well, your Twitter is first name Kirill_Gertman. We'll have all the links
That's
to
right.
Conduit in the show notes. Is there anywhere else that you are writing or making content, or are you?
Sure.
Yeah.
You can find me on, actually, most of my kind of writing, if you can call it that, is on LinkedIn these days for some reason. So you can find me there. That's my name, right? Kirill Gertman.
Awesome.
And yeah.
Yeah. Dude, this is a lot of fun.